Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Wednesday night class, which I have the honor to be giving now for a number of years, a number of decades, going back to the previous millennium. It always feels good to say that. It feels like there's longevity. Tonight we will be discussing the topic called, Where Does Heaven Meet Earth? And let me tell you why this topic is, I believe, very relevant to us all. Just looking at the New York Times bestseller list, there are 3 books, all with the word heaven in them, on their bestseller list currently. Their names are Proof of Heaven, Heaven is for Real, and Waking Up in Heaven. All testifying to near-death experiences or other type of spiritual experiences that these authors purportedly experienced. There are many skeptics that wonder that the whole thing is hogwash and just their own fantasies. The book Heaven is for Real is written by a neuroscientist. So that particularly irks many in the scientific world, because they say, here's a scientist betraying the scientific so-called Holy Grail, that one does not talk about spirituality. We have no proof for it and so on. But he talks about it in a very realistic way. It's a book that's captured the attention of millions of people, as did these other books that I just mentioned. It's interesting that it's all now, because from the Jewish calendar, we're coming now from Shavuos. Shavuos is a holiday where we celebrate, actually, where heaven meets earth. That's the way the Talmud, the Medrash, explains the experience of Sinai. Up till that point, the Medrash says there was a split between that which was above and that which is below. El Yainim la yardu lamata, that which was above did not come down below, and that which was below did not go up above. There was a gzera, which means a decree, a schism, a split, a chasm. And by Sinai, this split was bridged, and heaven came down to earth, and earth rose to heaven, which really means the meeting of spirit and matter, the meeting of energy and matter. So it's a very relevant topic. And I would say it's something that addresses every one of us in a personal way, because there's no person on earth, no person in history that at some point has not in some way sought this place where heaven meets earth. Starting from the Bible, you have the stories, of course, the Garden of Eden, where heaven first kissed earth. Then you have the story of the Tower of Babel following the flood, where they built the Tower of Babel in order to access heaven. They failed, but they tried. Then the Torah documents it. Then you have the story of Jacob, his dream, Jacob's dream of the ladder. What is the ladder? The ladder is a ladder that's its feet were firmly planted on the ground. Sulam mutzav arza v'reishe magia shamayma, and the top of the ladder reached into the heavens. So clearly there was something about that, and he dreamt it. Did he leave us a formula? In a sense, this question is one that affects all of us, as I mentioned, because who in this world does not try to have some transcendence? Despite the fact that we're material creatures, with our routines and our habits and our needs, the needs to eat and to sleep and to nourish ourselves, the need for love, the need for companionship, but there's something about every human being that requires transcendence, something to get out of the routine, relieve ourselves from the monotony, of pedestrian life on earth, to search for heaven. So whether it's a mystic or a prophet, or whether it's a romantic or a musician, people have always sought this place called heaven. And not only to reach it, but to come back to tell about it. Jimi Hendrix wrote in his classic song, Purple Haze, "Excuse me while I kiss the sky." But he didn't come back to tell about it. He overdosed. Many other great souls were unable to reach those great heights and integrate it into their lives. Everybody seeks it, even scientists, in their search for the unified field theory, in the search for fusion, in the search for the singularity, for understanding a certain type of unity, which is really the essence of all science, is also another form of nirvana, another form of utopia. You can call it Messiah. There are many names for it. But they all talk about some type of fusion of a material world with something greater and higher. Now even shamans, or witch doctors, palm readers, psychics, are also seeking for the world of spirit. I've never attended a seance, but that's what seances, they say, are about. So however you twist and turn, whether it's con artists or real, this obsession is perhaps the greatest search in human history. The greatest search of the human being to find out what's going on in heaven. Is there a heaven? Can we connect to heaven? Even NASA, the billions of dollars that human beings have spent to satisfy our curiosity. We raise our eyes, we see the sky, we see the stars, we see the planets. Is there life out there? Is there a higher world? And how does it speak to us? Or is this all fantasy? Unrealistic. So however you turn, you'll find this search for heaven and the search where heaven meets earth as being part of our lexicon, part of our language, part of our conversations, part of our searches. When someone looks for love, they say, I found heaven. I'm in seventh heaven. All expressions that indicate on the seeking of something that is beyond us. And then of course there's that obsession, where does heaven actually meet earth? You see the horizon. You see a sunrise on the horizon. You see the heavens. You see the heaven has a place where it kisses earth. Today we know the world is round. By the way, the Zohar and the Talmud always knew that the world was round. Being round, so there's the horizon. So it appears to us that there's a place where heaven touches earth, but in fact, it's where the earth is, the curvature of the earth. But it appears to us, and it mesmerizes us. So whether it's metaphorical or poetic, that search continues. And today in this class, I'm going to try to unravel the secret, where does heaven actually meet earth? But that will come at the conclusion of this discussion. But once laying the groundwork of understanding this whole the whole search that we're talking about here, and understanding how it manifests in our lives, it gives us an opportunity to make it relevant. So my objective here is that all of us should envision, where do you want heaven? What area of your life would you like to see where heaven and earth meet? Now let's use Einstein, the good old Jew Einstein. E equals mc squared. Basically establishing that matter and energy are reversible. They're two forms of the same thing. Energy equals mc squared, matter. Which means that there's really one unity. Even though it takes the shape of matter, but in fact it's energy. We all understand the classic high school example for that, or even elementary school example, of the water molecules. In water, they're in a state of liquid. You heat it up, it becomes gas, energy. You freeze it, it becomes ice. All the same substance, nothing was added, no new ingredients. So clearly we have indication, we have examples of matter and energy going back and forth. Every fuel that turns into energy. Everything is energy, and everything that is matter is energy, and anything that is that energy can be turned into matter. So they're reversible, and they're basically different entities, the same entity in different states. This is a scientific fact today. When we talk about subatomic particles, when we talk about the DNA of the human being, we're talking about forces that are energy forces. They're not tangible, and yet they shape all tangible matter. And it's still a mystery to most, to all, how that works. When does the energy turn into matter? What does it happen? Will you just have a lot of atoms and suddenly it becomes matter? What holds them together? Higgs boson and many other questions that still haunt the scientific world. And here too we're going to learn many fascinating facts from the story of Sinai, the story of Shavuos, which we're coming from last week, the holiday, and teaching us about the fusion of heaven and earth. Now, one of the interesting things in Kabbalistic thought is the idea that everything is microcosm, macrocosm. If we talk about matter and energy, or heaven and earth as spirit and matter, and their joining or their separation, we also talk about it in our personal lives. So when someone says, I'm in seventh heaven, or I feel like heaven, or I feel good, there's also a type of fusion. And when we feel disconnected, and we feel fragmented, we feel splintered, that's essentially like a separation between spirit and heaven and earth, matter and energy, or matter and spirit. So this lies at the heart of the big question, because it's really one that begins on a psychological, personal level. Our own happiness. Human beings abhor the concept of fragmentation. Even on a very basic level. We organize. We put things on shelves, in files. Even children, give them objects of different shapes. They'll fit them into the respective holes. Even a disorganized person doesn't think he's disorganized. This is what we call disorganized. For him, it's organized. So every person has the concept of order. We like to organize things. Some are obsessed. Some go to our OCD in this regard. But regardless, even on a healthy level, there is a point of taking many things. You want to have organization in your cupboard, on your desk, on your computer. And when there are things disorganized or chaotic, it disturbs us. It disturbs our state of mind. It disturbs our peace of mind. This idea of unity is not just a nice, convenient thing. It happens to be also psychologically what makes them what we call health is unity. What is health? Health is an energy flow, whether you call it spirit, soul, entering into your body. But entering in a way that's seamless. If someone asks you, what does health feel like? You say you have an answer, that's not good. If health feels like anything, it's not health. It should be seamless. What does breathing feel like? It shouldn't feel like anything. It should be just smooth. So there's a certain type of synchronicity, I would say. Seamlessness is maybe the right word. If there's fragmentation, if there's something severed, God forbid a blockage of the blood, of any of the blood vessels and arteries. God forbid any type of blockage not allowing the breath to come. Or any type of impediment, that is what creates, in other words, fragmentation is what we call lack of health. Unity, a healthy soul inside of a healthy body. Where the life force flows through our body from head to toe. It's a cycle. You exhale and you inhale. Contract and expansion of the heart. The blood is flowing in all parts of the organs to the extremities, returning. The kidneys are cleansing the body, eliminating waste. The blood is absorbing the oxygen and the nutrients that come from different foods we eat. It's all a machine, a well-oiled and seamless machine. It's unity. You look at nature, you see the harmony within diversity, the extraordinary, fascinating, astonishing type of unity. So many different systems, so many different organisms, millions, billions, trillions, and yet they work in this coordinated way, like a choreographer, like a silent choreographer, an invisible choreographer, maneuvering that everything fits exactly. How animals multiply, how the larger animals that are predators multiply less numbers than the food that they eat, how vegetables work, the whole basis of the ecosystems, the food chain, the ideas of the idea of photosynthesis, how the leaves and the trees absorb carbon dioxide, how the oceans regenerate, how the rains fall, how even the storms that strike us are all part of this balance. It's amazing. You touch any part of nature, there's not one thing that's not enthralling, not one thing that is not mesmerizing. It's all a balance. Everything in a cycle. Like our heartbeat. The ocean tides, the ocean waves. Everything comes down to that type of experience. So we find unity wherever we go. So it's not surprising why scientists are always looking for unity. The scientific search is essentially trying to find those unified laws and rules that explain the diverse phenomena. As science progressed through history, that's what happened. They began to be able to create all-inclusive rules and laws that explained all these different phenomena. It comes down to that we still need the unified field theory to explain the combination between the microscopic quantum world, the macroscopic Newtonian physics world, combination between relativity and quantum mechanics, or whether we call it the four forces of gravity, electromagnetism, the nuclear strong and weak force. The search for unity is the search for what is most natural to us and what we relate to. Now someone will say, well, why? Maybe the world is fragmented. Who says it has to be unified? It's just a given. It's an axiom. All nature testifies to it. All human inclinations testify to it. Everything that makes us comfortable testifies to it. Judaism, the Torah would add, it's all because it all begins with Hashem Echad. The most famous liturgy in Judaism is what? Shema. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu. Hear, O Israel, we cover our eyes. We cover our eyes from looking at the fragmentation, the artificial and superficial fragmentation of the universe. We cover, we meditate, and we contemplate. that it's really Hashem Echad. There's a unity, a oneness. Despite the diversity, there's a force that coordinates it all. We call it harmony within diversity. So, for example, when you read the story of Bereshis, of Genesis, it says the first day there was, first of all, chaos, and then Vayhi-ar. In this dark world, God brought light, and that day was good, the day of light. First day, Echad, unity. Not Yom Rishon, the Medrash says, Yom Echad. Echad, Shmach, Hashem Echad. Oneness. Because then prevailed unity. Then came day 2. Day 2, like the number implies, division. That was the day that division was created. Diversity. God separated from the upper from the lower. The upper heavens and waters from the lower ones. That day we don't say Ki Tov. It doesn't say it was good. Because though it is ultimately hidden good, but it created the potential for conflict, for divisiveness, and for war. Comes day 3, vegetation, birth, vegetation. That teaches us, and it says twice good. Because number 3 is the third reconciling force. Shnei Ksuvim, like we say in the morning prayers, 2 verses contradict each other, comes the third verse and reconciles it. The mediator, the harmonizer, the diffuser, the integrator. That's Tiferes. And that's the ultimate goal. Echad, the oneness of day 1, is beautiful. But it's not beauty. Because one color, one musical note, as beautiful as it is, it can become monotonous. Tiferes, beauty, is 3. It's 2 diverse things, and then you bring them together. You look at anything that you call beautiful, you'll see it's never one-dimensional. A beautiful face, a beautiful picture, a beautiful horizon, a beautiful piece of music. It's many different forces, all organized in a way and coordinated that creates beauty. Frankly, beauty is only possible in this place where ugliness is possible. Which, what do you mean by ugliness? All these forces, because they're diverse, could have caused, like day 2, they could have caused divisiveness and separation and fragmentation and ultimately war. If you only have one color, there's no one to go to war with. You have only one musical note, there's no one to battle with. 2 means 2 opinions. But beauty is always there in the place of diversity. Harmony within diversity is what the real definition of beauty is. So the search for unity in this world is not trying to clone and say everything is one. It's saying that even though on one level it seems that there's such diversity, in truth is it's really an expression of oneness, just in infinite different possibilities. Which actually is one of the fundamental themes of a discourse that I've been mentioning throughout the last year, that we began studying or celebrating the centennial and 100th anniversary of Hemshech Hayim Beis. It began being delivered on Shavuos a year ago, 1912, and 1913 Shavuos, section 2, or so-called, you can say, scene 2, act 2 of Hayim Beis unfolds, Shavuos, which is 100 years from where we are now. I actually give a class on this every morning. You can see it on YouTube. We post them all. It's hundreds of classes by now. Fascinating, profound, cosmic mysteries and secrets. But one of the key principles there is fusion. The interface. The interface between a finite existence and an infinite one. The interface between heaven and earth. So it's not a surprise that the discourse begins on Shavuos and it continues on Shavuos. Shavuos seems to be the launch pad of each section of Hayim Beis, starting from its beginning. It's called B'Shah Shekdimu. Tafresh Hayim Beis. B'Shah Shekdimu refers to a statement regarding Sinai, because the message is the fusion of heaven and earth. The message is, how do we reconcile a finite, limited, flawed existence? How do we connect it to Hashem Echad, to a perfect, united, omnipresent, indivisible, infinite, higher reality? That's the search for heaven and earth. And Hayim Beis lays out a very elaborate scheme of switches, of interfaces that make these connections. For more, check out IamBeis.com. YouTube, we have a channel called Hayim Beis, one of our playlists, and you can find plenty of material on this. But I just wanted to connect it to our discussion here. So one of the themes that he talks about in Shavuos 100 years ago in 1913, these weeks, he talks about this bridge between the two realities, and says that the truth is we have both in our existence. We have both the reality called the infinite reality, and we have the finite, what we would call heaven and earth. And all of us, as we aspire to something beyond us, that's the heaven within us. As we are grounded and deal with the survival matters of our lives, that's the earth within us. When Jacob dreamed and saw a ladder with its feet firmly planted on the ground and its head reaching into heaven, this was symbolic of the human search. The rungs of the ladder and the ladder represent prayer. And it's one of the ways that a human being, through prayer, through song, because prayer, one of the names for prayer is song. So when you listen to music and you close out the world and you shut your eyes and you put on those headsets and you completely are encompassed by this all, submerged by this all surrounding sound of music, you are going to heaven in a certain possible way. The question is whether it's in a responsible way, whether it's going to come back to refine you or it's just an escape for a moment of entertainment. But the search, the reason we look for it is because we on earth are looking for that higher experience. When we go to the waters, beachfront property is very expensive. We like to go into the water. The water is a symbol of a heavenly experience. It says that the water, the blueness of the water reflects the blueness of heaven. The heaven is similar, the waters are similar to heaven. So we get submerged in it, like submerging in music. There's something soothing about it, going underwater. Actually, it's reminiscing of our own beginnings, where we began submerged in the embryonic fluids and waters in our mother's womb. All of existence, Bereshit Bara, the beginning of existence, was also submerged in those waters. So that recreates for us, reenacts for us, that type of experience being surrounded by heaven. And that's a certain type of comfort to know that we live on earth but we're surrounded by heavens. And that is in its broader, more poetic context, but the same thing is in the search for love. We search for love. Love is more than just a tangible physical thing. I need bread, I need water, I need shelter, I need clothing, and I need love. No, love doesn't fit into that category. Love is something far more sublime. Maybe a need, but it's far more than a need. It's a transcendent experience. You're loving someone outside of yourself. You're going to heaven in some ways. On earth, we are each in our own little cubicle, each our own space, time and space. In heaven, we become encompassed by others. When we have the chuppah, the canopy is like a heavenly canopy. It's a canopy. The heaven is called Kippah Shamayim, the canopy of heaven. We reenact that in the chuppah at a wedding ceremony, and we have the canopy. The chuppah is like a heaven that surrounds and encompasses both bride and groom, showing us that there's a transcendent element beyond the differences between us. Wherever you turn, you'll find this search. And the dilemma still remains, how do these two meet? Where do they meet? Is it possible for them to meet? So the first thing is we have to get out of the anthropomorphic concept that heaven is some type of physical thing. Obviously, you take a spaceship, you go up into heaven, but is that really heaven or is that the sky? The atmosphere, outside of the atmosphere, outer space. Heaven really is symbolic of the spirit, of energy. When I mentioned before the scientists seek for the search for the unified field theory, they're not seeking a particular place. It's a concept. It's a state of consciousness. It's a state of being, a state of mind. And the same thing is here. You can live in heaven. There's an expression, Elam chatira b'chayecha. In this world, in your lifetime, you can experience heaven. You don't need to die. And your soul goes to Gan Eden. Which also, frankly, we talk about the soul goes to heaven. As I've said many times when people ask me, where does the soul go to upon its passing? The question is based on an arrogant assumption that we are where it's at and the soul is going somewhere. And I often describe the imaginary dialogue between electricity and a refrigerator. The refrigerator asks electricity, where do you go to when they pull the plug? Electricity, with indignation, turns to the refrigerator and says, what kind of chutzpah is that question? You ask me where I'm going to? Where did you come from? They just invented you 100 years ago, 200 years ago. They learned to create this box. You learned to generate energy. You learned to contain my energy for a little while, refrigerate food, and now you think you're the center of existence. You're a little box that doesn't know anything outside of its box, outside of its own myopic perspective. I go back where I always was. I was not confined in you. You'll never understand it because you're confined in your reality, your farm, your little narrow picture. So I go back where I always was, not confined by any boxes or any time and space. So when we say where does the soul go to, Well, maybe it's not going anywhere. Who says this is it? What we have on earth is a very small perspective of a higher reality. So when we say search for heaven, we're actually asking for the search for reality. We're looking for the big picture, which is not surprising. When you go up to heaven on top of a mountain, you have a bird's eye view, the bigger picture. So it's more than just a physical climbing. The Tower of Babel people, what was their mistake? Their search was a healthy search. One does supposed to search for heaven. But they built a tower. They thought they're going to physically build a tower. And they're going to, as the Torah says, in order to build for themselves a name. It was an arrogant exercise. And arrogance and heaven are antithetical. Because the whole point of the search for heaven is a humble search. Like the Talmud says, God says to an arrogant person, you and I cannot rest under the same canopy. Canopy. Why canopy? Because a canopy, symbol of the chuppah, requires a certain type of sublimation, a type of submission, surrender, modesty, humility, not weakness, not a strength. The people after the flood, they thought in their strength we're going to build a name for ourselves and we're going climbing to heaven, we'll fight, have a war with God or whatever it was that they were intended to do. That failed. They were unified in the effort, and that's why God said to them, what God did was He separated. What did He do? He exposed their fragmentation. They were unified in their collective effort, like the Nazis were unified in an evil effort. But the truth is, as soon as you're unified with something that is not a positive thing, there's true fragmentation. That's what God said. Babel comes from the word Tower of Babel. Babel comes from the word Babel. If we say babbling, it comes from confusion. He confused their languages. He exposed that they are really material human beings trying to have a spiritual experience on their terms. And that was their undoing. The searching for heaven is on heaven's terms, not on our terms. So in direct proportion to our humility will be our experiencing of that heaven. And that was the mistake of the Tower of Babel. They went with their drive and their arrogance. We're going to do it. We'll build ourselves a name. Instead, they ended up destroying each other and dispersing across the world because they didn't speak the same language. Now, of course, language, it was physically different languages, but also think about it metaphorically. They didn't speak the same. My interests are not your interests. That means the antithesis to what heaven is about. Heaven is a uniting force. It's meant to bring people together because there's bittul, when there's humility. If you're going to climb and try to reach heaven out of arrogance, ultimately you're doing it for self-interest. Ultimately your self-interest is going to conflict with someone else's. The idea of unity per se by definition means for me to work together with you in a coordinated effort is not we have to annihilate each other, and neither can we be completely consumed with self-interest. I have to know I am me, but I am also part of a whole. Im einan nili mili, Hillel says. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? That's where it begins. But then comes step 2. If I'm only for myself, what am I? So it's a combination of a sense of self. Like we said, at day 3, there's distinct entities, but there's harmony within diversity. And that was their mistake. They stuck at day 2. We were searching heaven, everyone for their self-interest. No. That ultimately is destruction. In Jacob's dream, however, it was a humble dream. He woke up with humility, realizing where he's sitting, where he's lying. His dream was about connecting to the divine. It wasn't about me climbing ladders. Actually, it's the angels that are climbing. He had the experience of the dream of it. And ultimately, Jacob, through that, taught us how one climbs a ladder. It's prayer. What is prayer? A prayer means you sit humbly, quietly in your place, and you emote with God. You speak to something greater than yourself. Not because you want it selfishly, just like you have everything else. You have a collection of everything, and you want to have another collection. Part of your collection is also God. Like, for example, love, the same thing. I collect everything, and I also collect people that love me. No, if it's about you and your insecurities, it's not true love, and it's not true unity. Prayer is the humble recognition of a reality that's greater than we are. We're not the refrigerator that says, I'm it. Prayer says, I'm not it. I want to connect to something that's beyond me because I know that this cannot just be it. So the searching for heaven is really the search of recognizing, starting with a process of elimination, that this reality is not it. This reality is not the center of existence. Recognizing I am not the center of the universe. That doesn't annihilate you. That doesn't make you less, it makes you more. Because it comes to recognize the truth that there's a bigger picture than you can ever imagine. And that's when you begin to see heaven. Think of someone living in a valley, in a cave, in a pit, with their head constantly downward. What are they going to see? They're going to see themselves. They'll see the earth beneath them. They'll see the creatures near them. And that will be it. A human being walks upright and looks upward and sees the heavens and sees who created all this. Look at animals. Animals are not looking to improve their lives. They're satisfied with their lot. And that's how they're meant to be. Like one of the Rebbe says, an animal has never seen heaven. An animal has never seen heaven because an animal looks, its physiology is, its head is downward. It sees what it needs. It's survival. Its own needs, its offspring, its hunting, prey, food, and so on, shelter. A human being walks upright because our eyes are the highest part, the head is the highest part, and we look up to heaven because we are seeking something greater. We're looking for heaven. And we're looking for heaven to bring it down to earth because that's the purpose of existence. The soul is like a flame that licks the sky. And the body is like a wick that grounds it. And as I've discussed many times, that is the purpose of existence. For us to look for heaven, to bring heaven and connect it to us and to our bodies, which is the essence of a mitzvah. A mitzvah means connection. Connection with what? With spirit. Connecting matter to spirit. But not in a way that spirit overwhelms and annihilates and obfuscates matter, but in a way where they fuse together and matter becomes energy, spiritual energy. So this is far deeper than just a scientific search for unity. This is far deeper than that type of experience. This is an experience of our personal lives connecting with our purpose. Our fragmentation connecting with a unifying principle, a guiding principle that makes everything, that turns everything into a oneness. Not a oneness that eliminates diversity, but harmony within diversity. And hence Matan Torah, Sinai, when was it? It was the 3rd month. Nisan is the 1st month, the revelation of at Egypt. 1. Iyar, that's from above down. Iyar, the 2nd month, Chodesh HaSheni, is a month of Pesach Sheni. It's a month where we count, we climb upwards, 49 days, and then comes month 3 that brings together the two and creates fusion. Tiferes zeh Matan Torah, the Talmud says. Tiferes is Matan Torah, the fusion of heaven and earth, the ability to take our material existence and spiritualize it. That ultimately the relief of the tension between matter and spirit, between matter and energy, is achieved through spiritualizing the material. Not through destroying the material, and not through compromising the spirit. It's about joining the two. But to do that requires one condition. Bittul, humility. If you don't have that humility that the Jews had when they stood at Sinai, it says, Ki ish echad b'leiv echad. Millions of people. But they stood as one person with one heart. Not like the Tower of Babel, everyone was in it for themselves. They were united because effectively they were united in being in it for themselves. But it would not have lasted. Because their drive was personal gain. A name, Lasas Lem Shem, to make a name for themselves. Whereas here it comes with a bittul. And the bittul is the key. Think of anything. Any matter turns into energy. How does it happen? Take a piece of... What is fuel? Fuel is only when it's conducive. A piece of metal cannot be lit. A piece of wood could be lit. Because there are certain items, there are certain substances that are into themselves. They're not ready to become fuel for something else. Olive oil. Pure olive oil. A wick. These are substances. The Talmud talks about Elo HaMadlikin. In the Tractate of Shabbos talks a whole chapter about what are the substances you can use for wicks to light Shabbos candles. This isn't just, that's a technical part of it, but there's a spiritual part. In order for something to be able to become fuel, it has to be conducive. It has to be receptive. If it's into itself, it's not ready to become sublimated and fuel for something else. Any good life, any healthy life, love, I become fuel for someone else. Not because I become less, it's because I don't allow my self-contained, self-absorbed self to become the controlling factor. That's earth. Gravity pulls us downward. A flame rises upward. A flame creates unity. Flames join together. They become so one you can't tell when two flames, when they join, which is which. And interestingly, when you light other flames, the original flame does not get diminished. In material world, anything you give, you get diminished. You give food, you have less food for yourself. Give money, give other things. You give your time. In love, the more you give, the more you have. Because you're turning what you have, instead of containing it, you're turning it into fuel that fuels others. And your original flame does not get weakened, it gets stronger because you have now fueled many, many other factors. Many, many other people, your environment. Illuminators. As this Parsha talks about, the menorah. To kindle, to raise the flames until they rise on their own. So again, the idea of flame rising on your own is part of who you are, and you are now becoming the illuminator, a walking menorah. So in this discussion of where heaven meets earth, the answer is ultimately that heaven meets earth, you know where? At your doorstep. That's where it meets. We don't need to seek the deepest mystical experiences. It comes down to it's at your doorstep. When you take your life and instead of focusing on yourself, you focus it toward heaven, you focus it upward instead of inward, upward towards something higher instead of downward towards yourself, that's how heaven meets earth. That's what Matan Torah taught us. That's the secret. And that's what everybody is seeking. But people are seeking it in many distorted ways, in many selfish ways. The key is, how we do it is this way. Sinai was also called Sulam. They're the same number. That they're the same idea. Like the ladder of Jacob, because he prepared the ground for the climbing of the ladder that would happen at Sinai, where Moses climbed the mountain and God came down on the mountain, came down on the Sinai. They used the ladder. A ladder, you go up and you go down. So it's building a ladder. And what's interesting about a ladder is there are rungs. It's not a jump. It's a process. Everybody has to do it at their step and their pace. Well, one person's heaven is another person's earth. Well, one person's earth is another person's heaven. And what heaven was for you yesterday may be earth for you then tomorrow. And you need to continue to climb. Like we climb on a mountain, what happens? What you saw the horizon of yesterday is now for you regular. Now you need to climb higher. And you see broader horizons. So heaven and earth can absolutely meet in the fullest sense of the word. They will ultimately meet, as it says when Mashiach comes. There'll be the total fusion of the two entities, the two worlds, heaven and earth. There'll be a shamayim chadash and ba'aretz chadash, a new heaven, a new earth. But how we do this is in our personal lives. So let's use some examples. I've shared the story many times with the Tzemach Tzedek when he was climbing the ladder again. And he was not afraid to climb to the top. All the other kids were afraid to climb to the top. So he explained to his grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, why? Because the other kids, when they kept climbing, they kept looking up. They kept looking down, So they saw how high they were, and they were afraid to climb higher. So I'm already so high. Ooh. The others, the Tzemach Tzedek on the other hand, he kept looking up. Sumar Menechem, he kept looking up. He saw how low he was, so he was motivated to climb higher. When you hang around with people that are less accomplished than you, you're looking down, you say, hey, look how much I've done compared to them. It doesn't help for humility. You hang around with people that have done more than you, if you're a healthy person, it causes humility, not jealousy, and not schadenfreude, not forgiving them. It causes you more to motivate it. I'm looking up. I see what others have done. I want to climb as well. So it's about soaring on our wings, taking flight. That is the key. So how do we do this? We have this ladder in our lives all the time. We are constantly consumed and dealing with the material world. We sit down by a meal. We walk down the street. We meet somebody. We go to work. You go shopping. You dress. You take a shower. Whatever it is, brushing your teeth. The Torah's beauty is, in each of those things you can experience heaven. You don't need to wait for Yom Kippur and fasting and wearing all white. You don't need to wait for Shavuos to climb the mountain. You climb the mountain anytime you want. Every small act, you have two choices. Are you going to be earthbound and grounded in your little box? Or are you going to bring heaven into it? So when William Blake writes, right, to see a world in a grain of sand, a heaven in a wildflower, to hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Well, William Blake lived at the time of the Baal Shem Tov. But the words he captured is essentially the words of Sinai. Exactly, a heaven in a wildflower. A a world in a grain of sand, eternity in an hour, and infinity in the palm of your hand. The Baal Shem Tov teaches how you do that. What's your palm of your hand? Your palm of your hand you can use to take. You know, like the story with Jimmy, who's drowning in the waters. And Jack walks by and says to him, give me your hand. He refuses. And so he says again, give me your hand. He keeps going down under the water. He's about to drown. So somebody walks by and says, Joe never gave anything to anybody. Say, take my hand. And he said, take my hand. And so Joe suddenly grabbed his hand. Because he's a taker, not a giver. So with your palm of the hand, you can be using to take, to hoard, to grab, to collect, to gather, to acquire. Or as the Baal Shem Tov says, nosen titen, the double giving. You take your hand, you put it in your pocket, you take a coin out of your pocket, you stretch it out and give it to someone. And that's heaven. That's infinity in the palm of your hand. Why is it heaven? Because he compares it to the name of Yud Kei Vav Kei, the 4 letters of God's name. The Yud is the coin, like a dot, the Yud. The Hey is your hand, the 5 Heys, 5. Like a Hey, it's your hand. The Vav is your outstretched hand as you're reaching out to someone to give, not to take, to give. And the other Hey is the Hey of the recipient, as he's taking his palm and receiving what you give him. This is symbolic physically when you give charity, it's that way. But it's also symbolic anytime we reach out, anytime we teach, anytime we inspire, anytime we illuminate someone. You have this choice 24/7. So you have heaven at your doorstep every second, but it's up to you. It's not going to happen through a shaman or through a psychic or through magic tricks. It's going to happen through your simple choice. Do I choose earth? Do I choose heaven? And you're taking your earth and turning it into heaven. This is the ultimate unified field theory. I've shared this theory of mine many times. They say in the quantum mechanics, that's Heisenberg's theory, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, that part of it is that the observer affects existence. If that's the case, maybe, if we are fragmented within ourselves, if a scientist is fragmented, maybe atoms and subatomic particles sense that, and they ultimately will never allow you to experience unity until you find inner unity. Which means it's not enough just to have theoretical unity, that your life should be consistent with your goal, with your ideals. That your seamlessness should be a moral, ethical person who lives up to a spiritual higher standard. And maybe when the subatomic particles see that and experience that, they will adjust and allow you to see the unified field theory. So unity is available to us all the time. Where heaven meets earth. Where heaven meets earth is right at your doorstep in every move you make. You eat an apple. You're walking in the street, you're walking in a field and you're hungry and thirsty, you see an apple. You have 2 choices. Do you rip it off and just indulge? Or do you gently take it, make a blessing, meditate and contemplate that you're allowing the energy to be absorbed by you, and do something constructive with that energy? If you don't, the apple says to you, what right did you have to rip me off a tree where I was living peacefully and not harming anyone, and you're using the energy that you derive from me to hurt someone? Better have left me neutral. When you do a mitzvah, then the apple thanks you. On the tree I would never have been able to help someone. You've now turned me into heaven. You've turned me into a piece of heaven. Which explains that Mishnah that says the 2 seemingly contradictory reasons why a human being was created last. 6 days of creation and the human was created last. The first answer is given because he's the guest of the table. Special guest. You don't bring him to an empty table. First you set the table. The whole world was created. Then he comes as a guest. The second reason given is that you should always know, human being, that even a lowly insect was created before you. So which one is it? Are we a great guest? Or are we lower than the lowly insect coming after it? It's up to our choice. If you choose earth, an earthly life, remember Adam comes from the word earth. God took Afra min Adama. It's the only creation he took. The animals were not taken from earth. Animals were created alive as they are. They grew out of the ground. Like vegetables. You take earth, and then he instilled, imbued in it, nishmas chayim. V'yipach ba'apav nishmas chayim. He imbued in it a soul, which is God's breath. So you can choose the path of earth. Selfish, gravitated to yourself, gravitating to yourself, pulling everything down, which gravity does. In, all your box, your little box. And then, if you do that, you're lower than an insect. Don't think you're so great, because even an insect was created before you, and an insect never transgresses God's will. However, you also have a soul. If you look up, not to earth, you look to heaven, and you infuse your perspective with heaven, and you infuse everything you do with a heavenly perspective for a higher purpose. L'shem shamayim, we say. L'shem shamayim is for the sake of heaven, the word heaven. Then you elevate, and all the insects and all the creatures all thank you, because you're the great guest that comes after them all to elevate them to a place they can never reach on their own. There's nothing in life that doesn't allow us these two options. We have the option of earth, the option of Shem Shamayim, of heaven. And the goal is to join the two together. So, where does heaven meet earth? My friends, in your heart, in your choices, in your arms, in your legs, at your doorstep. That's where they meet. And especially coming from Sinai, where we celebrate 3,325 years since the original Sinai. Just last week, we have this power 3,325 times, and we're still here talking about it. That means we have this power in unbelievable ways. And we look today around, in science, in the world, we've seen a joining of heaven and earth in ways that we've never seen. Simply every time you go on a plane, we've conquered the heavens, so to speak. We go to outer space. We see the fusion of spirit and matter and energy and matter in unprecedented ways. Every time you use a cell phone, every computer, television, radio, we're seeing this fusion taking place before our eyes. The final frontier, however, my friends, is at our threshold. Do you bring heaven and earth, matter and spirit, and fuse them into your own personal life? That is the great question. And that is the question that we all have to ask ourselves. And the ultimate answer, it lies in our hands, in the palm of your hand. Infinity is indeed in the palm of your hand. Thank you, and we will continue next week again. I welcome you all to join us in the Meaningful Life Center. You can go to meaningfullife.com, join us on our email list and send us your email. We'll send you our weekly thought. And so until next week, have a very good week. Have a week where you actually marry heaven and earth and bring them together in one total fusion. Thank you so much.